Welcome to episode 10 of our IG Live session series. My name is Tanvi Bhatia and I'm your host. All our previous episodes are available on my YouTube channel, and the link can be accessed through the bio. Today we're going to talk about one of the most important topics. It's called trauma. Now, when we hear the word trauma, we generally picture maybe a car crash, plane wreck, house fire, maybe abuse. Now, all these potential experiences that I just mentioned can be traumatic. A World Mental Health survey conducted by World Health Organization, found that about a third of the 125,000 people surveyed from 26 different countries had experienced trauma. Now, these numbers are only based on the instances that were recorded. The actual number probably would be much, much higher. Trauma is identified by any experience that can be characterized by the feeling of helplessness, and it overwhelms your ability to cope. Experiencing trauma in our lives can have significant impacts on our eventual health conditions, and also can be a risk factor for chronic diseases. We don't really talk about it much. Not only about trauma, we don't talk about how to heal from it. Now, this is exactly what we are going to do today. We're going to talk about how we can heal from trauma. Our guest expert, Dr. Mohammed Almoathen. Now, Dr. Mohammed is a celebrated cognitive psychologist. He is a renowned author, and he is the CEO of Kanz Alexia, Center for Training, Consultation and Development in the Kingdom of Bahrain. So without further ado, let me add him now. Hello, Dr. Mohammed, how are you?
It's my pleasure as usual. Thank you for your efforts.
Anytime, and I love talking to you and our team, the V.M.G team, all the time. So as we discussed today, it's a very, very important topic that we are going to talk about, Doctor. Trauma, as we've all heard the word, we all have an idea what exactly it is, but for those of us who are actually experiencing trauma or have people around them who are experiencing trauma, they should know what is the actual definition of trauma and what are the implications of it.
If we want to simplify the definition, we can call it as an emotional response to a critical situation that inhibit us to deal with ourselves and the situations and others difficulties. So it is an emotional response toward the critical situation. Yeah.
Are there any symptoms that you feel that might be when you see a person who might be experiencing trauma? I mean, is there any specific symptoms that you can feel?
Yeah, we will face both of symptoms coming from the body and the psychological system. We will see that person as irritated, and he faced many of the sleep problems, and we will feel that he is depressed through his talking as well. We will see it that he is very, very focused on something that happened to himself, and he's repeatedly telling that thing and facing many of the problems, and it will affect the body, and as well it will affect the psychological system, and we will see how that person is irritated and feel tense. So this is a body thing that we will face it directly when we see any human being facing trauma.
Okay, I mean, there might be people might be having, as you said, lack of sleep or insomnia, or fits of rage. Maybe they get angry very fast, or as you said, there will be an internal sadness, that they will feel sad all the time. So can we go into a little bit on the, the physiological, how does it affect our physiological system?
Yes, anybody face trauma, he will feel tense in whole the body, if this trauma affected that body for long time, more than 1 month, the person will face PTSD. They call it PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder that affected his gut and his heart rate and heart rate, and he will face many of the chronic diseases like cardiovascular diseases and many other things like the migraine and headache and tense with the neck and many other physical. So it's something very clear that most of the person that face the trauma, the gut will affect it. So that's why they face and subjected to the irritable bowel syndrome, they call it, because our brain directly connected with our heart and our digestive system, so it will affect our gut. So it's very important when you deal with the traumatized person to deal with the body and with the psychological system as well.
It reminds me, our conversation reminds me of a conversation that I'd had with Dr. Nada previously about when a person is stressed, like the lion story that she always says, that when the person is stressed, the primary stress hormone, that's the cortisol, is released. So I was reading that, when a person has experienced trauma, the cortisol is released, and the hormone will not differentiate between if it is a normal situation or it is a traumatic situation. So that generally can also affect in the future when people want to deal with by themselves. They can, get into bad habits like smoking and, even drinking alcohol or consuming alcohol, something to numb the pain or numb the symptoms or numb the situation that is happening around them. So this can be added as a physiological changes as well, or physiological effects in our body as well. Am I correct?
Yeah, correct. In fact, uncontrolled trauma, it will affect our brain. We will face many of the symptoms like the diseases, and at the same time, uncontrolled trauma, it will saved inside the body, because the fluid of the stress hormones, it's a defense mechanism to prevent us from the danger. But when the trauma finished, still our body saved that memory and anticipate that something will happen in the future. So it's continuously getting more and more and fluid of the stress hormones, and that's why when deal with the trauma, it is not just when the situation itself, the traumatized situation finish. It is about the effects of that situation after the trauma itself, the real trauma. So that's why when dealing with the trauma, we need to deal with the body symptoms and with the psychological symptoms as well, to make the real profound treatment for the trauma. So yes, our body deal with in fact, I want to add that thing as well. When we face trauma and we cannot get rid of it for a long time, all the bad emotions will saved inside our body, but sometimes it will be transferred as self-destructive behaviors. And that's why many of those who face traumas, they will go to use the drugs to relieve the pain. And maybe this is the most thing that we will use, but many of them maybe will face, for example, eating disorders, for example, because they want in front of the stress hormones, they want many of the things that giving them little bit pleasure, like serotonin, dopamine. So they are seeking many of the meals which sugar to get more dopamine, because they many of the stress hormones flooded inside, and they feel depressed and uncontrolled. So they use those the males with high sugar, and many of those traumatized persons, it's not easy to deal with them and to convince them to stop those behaviors and seek real treatment. So that's why the most of that self-destructive behaviors, they will seek to use the drugs.
So speaking of psychological effects, like what you just said, that they're like what we are talking right now is more of the physiological effects. Let's go a little bit into the psychological effects of trauma.
First thing is the memory, because when cortisol getting in a high level, it will affect our memory and our emotions, because amygdala, which is the area that control our emotions, it will work in a high level, so our brain waves will be high. So that's why when anybody faces the trauma, the frontal lobe, which is the thinking area inside our brain, will be shut down, and the amygdala, and they call it emotional brain, will start working by itself. And that's why it's very difficult to control it, because while the thinking area stop, the emotional brain start working in a high level. It's very important to seek a professional help and treatment to reactivate the frontal lobe, to make it get the control of the emotional brain. And many of the other psychological disorders, like eating disorders, sleep disorders, and it's very difficult to think while you are facing a trauma, because, as I said, the frontal lobe shutting down and the memory start to activating, and it's repeat itself more and more. So that's why the psychological treatment, it's targeted the memory to stop it. If we are not stop the memory, it will work, and we will let us living the same critical situation in each single moment in our life.
The trauma memory, as you said, the trauma memory is not really stored in our brain like a movie. It's like fragments, right? It's like pictures and sounds and smells. So it can be used as a trigger. Like barbecue can be, it's a normal barbecue, but for someone it's like a life-threatening situation, or a red light is a red light for us. But a person who's going through a traumatic experience, or who has PTSD, as you mentioned, can have this as a trigger. So do you think that this like what we are talking about is basically all the triggers are actually connected to our five senses?
Triggers connected to our five senses. So that's why the first step to deal with the trauma is to let that person be far away from the triggers, because as much as you face the triggers, it will generate more and more memory, and it will let the memory of the trauma effective. So it will be very difficult to deal with the trauma while you are facing the same triggers, which is create the trauma like a situations. It's very important to know that our psychological system is very, very complex. It is not easy to deal with it in 1 or 2 sessions. It's need a long time to deal with it through many professional tools. It's normal if you face a traumatic situation to feel depressed and to feel anxious, and but if it's if those symptoms continuously triggering for more than 1 month, it's need to a professional help to prevent that person from the trauma effect.
So as you said that the frontal lobe, or the prefrontal cortex that we say, is the rational part of our brains. That is where the processing and the consciousness that lives there. When we say that a person is in the traumatic situation, that thing, as you said, that it shuts down and the amygdala starts working. So when the trauma occurs, what are the responses that happens? I think there are the certain responses of trauma. Can you please go through those, please?
Yeah, many of the responses, they call it 4 Fs, like fight, flight, freeze, and faint. So even you will face and you will try to deal with the trauma, or you will go for the self-destructive behaviors to escape from the trauma, or you will feel that you cannot control it and it's a freeze situation. But in another situation, maybe you will face faint. Faint is like our body shutting down to try to prevent us from the effects of the trauma. So 4 responses: fight, flight, freeze, and faint.
Okay,
so and it's depend on the psychological immunity, and it's depend on how the psychological resilience. It's depend on our skills and our type of psychological system. So it is not the steps that you will face when you face a trauma. No, it's our responses. Maybe you will fight or flight or faint or freeze.
Like I was reading about it, and one of the things that says that sometimes when somebody is going through a traumatic situation, there was an example that the person is trying to take out money from the ATM, and there's a robber coming and pointing a gun at the back, and he's like, "Oh, give me all your money," and that person takes out everything. Okay, here's my money, here's my key, here's my house key, here's my and he gives her everything. Just let me live, just get me everything. And then later on, when that person is interviewed, that why did you give everything to him? He just asked you for money. Why did you give him your car and everything? He says, I don't know, So as you said, that the rational brain...
The rational brain shuts down, yes. So you cannot think while you are facing a trauma. Why always tell people you have to seek help from those professionals here while you are facing the trauma. Yeah, it's very important too.
Let's talk about, as we're talking about the physiological things, let's talk about how does the brain deal with the trauma here?
Brain deal with the trauma. When we face the trauma, our brain waves will be high, so it's difficult to control the physical responses because the brain guiding the body, brain control the body. So while the brain living in a high level of the waves, our body will be irritated. So we will see it clearly when we see anybody facing the trauma, that he's irritated, sweating, and with high heart rate. So it's very important for those professionals to observe the client's physical responses, because there are many of these responses. Maybe some of the people, when they face traumatized situation, they will be calm. Some of them will be irritated. It's treatment itself, it depends on the physical responses toward the trauma. So there is no only one way to deal with the trauma. It's depend on how the client's body dealing with this. But inshallah, in this life, we will give something I can call it the master key to the trauma, that it's very effective when anybody faces traumatizing situation. It's very effective. It's the right solution to deal with the trauma. We can talk about the V.M.G. What is V.M.G? It stands for human highest value. You have to discover your highest value and to know what does it mean, the human highest value, and to discover it and practice it more and more. It will give you the psychological immunity. Second thing is the mind. Its M stands for mind. It's very important to control the mind while you are facing the trauma. And I can describe at least 3 fundamental tools to manage and control the mind while you are facing the trauma, the first thing is self-talk. You have to be aware of your self-talk. What you are telling yourself while you are facing the trauma about yourself and others and the life. If you are, it's something like a dialogue inside your mind. If you are observing yourself that you are telling bad things about yourself and the critical situation itself or others or the life, try to stop that dialogue. Managing the mind, it's very important, because if you are controlling the mind, it means that you are controlling the thoughts. And controlling the thoughts, it will enable you to control the emotions. So the first tool is self-talk, to observe yourself. Don't let the resentment or anger control your emotions. So you have to be aware of what you are saying to yourself during the trauma situation. The second thing is the imagination or your memory, the flashbacks. You have to control them, because when you face a traumatic situation, it will be replay inside your mind continuously. So try to give an order to your mind. Say stop and try to shift to think about any other thing far away from that trauma, and to engage your mind with other things. If you face a trauma, then your mind will engage with it. So try to shift your mind to engage with any other thing, and especially if that thing is something give you the real happiness. So that's why we always tell people, if you want to engage, if you face a stressful situation and you have to engage your mind with your highest value, because highest value is the most important thing to engage with while you are facing a stressful situation, because it's the thing that gives you the real happiness, the real balance from deep inside. Don't seek the balance from inside through eating something or depend on the drugs or any other things. You have to discover your highest value to get the real balance from deep inside. The third thing is to set your action plan, which is your goals. That's why we said to the people, don't wait until you face trauma in your life. Try from now to get the psychological resilience, psychological immunity through going through this process. Discover your highest value, understand how the mind thinks, and learn how can you manage the thoughts, that you can manage the emotions through using those three tools. Self-talk and imagination and in fact action. And try to set your action plan now. Try to set a big goal for yourself to engage with it. So if you are doing those three steps and you are facing a trauma, it will not affect your psychological system, because you are getting the balance from deep inside. What is trauma? Trauma, it means that you are facing a flood of the stress hormones. It's something from inside. If you are doing your highest value, you will get another neurotransmitter like serotonin, dopamine, which is making the balance. So inside our psychological system, there are two systems, the sympathetic system and parasympathetic system. Sympathetic system is a system that try always to prevent you from the dangerous situations. So it will release more and more cortisol and adrenaline to enable you to take action at the right time when you are facing a danger. But when you facing a real situation or any situations, that psychological system, the parasympathetic, will work, and then it will come into its normal situation through activating the parasympathetic system. But if you are facing a trauma, this balance will not created inside psychological system. It will be continuously working in a high level, while the parasympathetic system, which is we can call it the calmness system, will not work effectively. effectively if we compare it with with the sympathetic system. So that's why the psychological interventions try to regain the balance between those two systems. So if you are discovering your highest value and controlling the mind and set your action plan, which has content of the a big picture, a big goal which is related to your highest value, it will give you the psychological immunity to inhibit you to go through a long range traumatic situation.
You know, there was something that we were discussing last time about trauma vicious cycle. Can you please go a little bit on the trauma vicious cycle, what exactly it is?
Trauma happens when a trigger, it's a critical situation that you face. It will shutting down the prefrontal cortex or frontal lobe, and it will activate the hippocampus, which is the memory storage, and the amygdala. While this trauma saved inside the memory, it will generate it and it will continuously remind you about this trauma. So it will generate more emotions through the amygdala, and amygdala giving the signals to the hippocampus, to the memory. And while it's giving the signals to the memory will give more time the amygdala, the data information, and the data information will activate amygdala. It will give it. So it is how the psychological treatment, it's try to inhibit or break down that circle between the amygdala and hippocampus, the memory. If the effective psychological treatment, it's a treatment that gives the tools to inhibit these signals between the amygdala and hippocampus. It's very important. So that's why there is a new now sort of psychological treatment. They call it somatic psychotherapy, which is the sort of the psychological treatment that enables the client to deal with his body and with his mind. That's why it is not easy to deal with the trauma, and we use to deal with it effectively to work with the mind and body. One of the most effective tools to deal with the body is using the deep breath. Breathing is very important because when we are tense, we will not breathe well. Somatic psychotherapy let the client be aware of his breathing and to take a deep breath as much as he can daily at each single moment, especially when he feel he's getting more tense. It will give more and more oxygen to the brain to let the brain waves coming down, so he will feel more comfortable. And there are in fact many other somatic psychotherapy, like the walking is one of the most important thing to use while you are facing any stressful situation. But before that, we have to think about our mentality, about the mind, and to use those three V.M.G to get the psychological immunity. And even if you are facing the trauma, it will relieve the trauma effectively, and then you have to shift to deal with the body to make it more comfortable while you are facing the trauma. Because if you deal only with the body, it will be difficult to get rid from the trauma. You need to deal with both. But first, to deal with the psychological system, because trauma saved inside our psychological system as bad emotions that let our body tense and distract, and it will give us many of the psychological disorders and chronic diseases like cardiovascular diseases, for example.
You're talking about V.M.G as an value, or what V.M.G value is very fingerprint to you. As a person, this is for you. It's made for you. But if now let's talk about it in a way that if a person around you is going through a traumatic situation or traumatic attack, like he's in that phase, and if somebody is around him, how can that person help at that point in time to control the situation?
Through when the person facing trauma, it's difficult to tell him go and do your highest value. He will not be aware of it. And in fact, most of the people, when they face the trauma, they will stop doing their hobbies, for example. So how can you convince him to go and practice his highest value? So it's need a professional intervention to convince him to use his highest value. But if I'm not a therapist, for example, and I want to help anybody to get rid from the trauma, at least to help him and remind him about his highest value, and try to be engaged with him and to share with him doing his highest value, because it's very important to know if we are facing trauma and the thing and these thinking areas stop. It's very important to know practicing the highest value, it will reactivate the frontal loop. It will regain your focus, and that regaining of the focus, it will help you to control the emotions, because if you are activating your frontal lobe, it means that you enable the rational mind to overcome the emotional mind. It's very important to so if you find somebody traumatized, try at the first and main step to help him is to remind him about his highest value and try to give him the full support to practice that highest value. It's very important. It means that it is your soul. Highest value is the soul, because psychologists divide our psychological system with a two-part, higher self and lower self. Lower self is ego. It's something to connect us with the material and try to push us always to seek to get more and more material things and do things. But the higher self, it's the soul. If somebody discovering his highest value and practicing his highest value, it means that he's activating the higher self, the soul, and enable it to control the ego. So if you are facing a traumatic situation, your ego will overcome your higher self. But if you are discovering your highest value and practice it, you will enable the higher self to overcome the ego. Then you will create the balance between those two important parts of your psychological system. That's why it's very important to know your highest value and to discover it and to practice it more and more. It will give you a balance. It will give you a psychological immunity. It will give you a profound psychological immunity. Most of the people, when they face trauma, they are seeking something, give them fake comfortable, and it will not continue. But if you are discovering your highest value and practicing your highest value, it will give you the authentic and real happiness from deep inside, and real and effective dealing with the trauma. In fact, it's very important for all the audiences to discover their highest value before they are facing any challenge inside or around them.
I mean, as we said, that once a person who is actually who has discovered their highest value and is practicing it, it's basically he's actually in meditation. He's actually meditating at that time, which can also calm him down in case of any traumatic experiences that he might, the triggers that he might experience.
Correct, yes. And I think, Tanvi, thank you to say that. I think the real meditation is to practice and focus on your highest value. It's real meditation, because meditation is practice that enable you to calm down the brain. But if you are doing your highest value, practicing your highest value, you will calm your brain effectively, not just for a period of time. If you are practicing more and more, because most of the people, they are seeking meditation because they are facing critical situations and they cannot, they are facing challenge to control those situations. So that's why they are continuously need to practice the meditation. But while you are practicing your highest value, you don't need to practice meditation, because at the same time, while you are practicing your highest value, it means that you're practicing real meditation. So it's very important to practice your highest value as a meditation tool.
I mean, this doesn't mean that, if somebody is, we're not saying that don't treat yourself. You should go and get help.
Correct.
The correct help. But this is the topic that we're talking about, is healing, is actually healing from inside, so that any sort of trauma that we might experience or we are experiencing already can be overcome by practicing our highest value.
I want to add this, meditation will calm down your body, but if you are practicing the highest value, you will calm down your soul. And this is what you need when you face trauma, because when you face the trauma, you feel lost from deep inside. So if you are just use some techniques to relax the body, you will not relax your soul. You need a real relaxation, need comfortable from deep inside through practicing the highest value. Yes, you need to comfort and relax your body through meditation and walking and many other techniques. But before that, you have to calm down your psychological system. Then try to shift to calm down your body through meditation, walking, and many other techniques.
If you want to deal with trauma successfully, is actually practicing and discovering your highest value.
Yeah, correct. Definitely. It's very important. Remember always that this thing, the highest value, we are always as a team try to say to the people, try to discover your highest value. It's your mission in life. It's your real legacy. If you want to live a legacy in this life, it's something not just to get a pleasure. It's something contains pain and pleasure, but it's something that gives you real mental health, real relaxation, real balance from deep inside. Most of the people, they are seeking the balance from many material things, and it gives them a short-term balance, and it will make some of the balance with the body, but not with the psychological system. The most important thing is to relax our psychological system to work well, and to let it overcome our body, to let our body working well.
As we mentioned, that all information, all the listeners, all the audiences, if you'd like to know more about V.M.G. and the experts of V.M.G., you can connect with us or connect with the V.M.G. experts. After this episode, I will be posting this with all the necessary tags on the post, so you can connect with them and know more about V.M.G. and discover your highest value, and how to create a mind and body coherence along with a proper goal and a strategic roadmap. So as we've talked about it before, that each thing that we experience, be it traumatic, it can be traumatic, it can be you want to heal yourself from any chronic diseases. Everything is related to your internal system or your internal goals. If you have your highest value, if you practice your highest value, you can heal yourself from any chronic disease. You can heal from even from trauma.
Correct, Tanvi. And in fact, facing trauma, it's a very challenging situation. But the psychologists observe that some of the people, when they face trauma, they are living in it for a long time. So they will subject it to the PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Some of them, they can go out of it. They can get rid of it. But they observe that some of the people, they are evolving because of the trauma. After the trauma, they will be more in a more growing path. So they call, instead of the PTSD, there is PTG, which is post-traumatic growth. because they are growing because of the trauma. That's why we tell people, try to use your mind to control your mind, to control your emotions. And if you are controlling your mind while you are facing traumatic situation, it's mean that not only you will transcend, you will go out of the or get rid of the trauma, but you will grow because of it. So when you face a trauma and using your mind well, you will invest in that trauma to grow, to go forward, to achieve your goals. Many of the persons, famous persons, writers, authors, coach, they are growing because of the trauma through using their mind well, because our mind, it has a huge energy. If you are not control it, it will working against you. If you control it, it will work with you and for you to grow. So it's very important, not the trauma itself. Don't let the trauma itself to destroy your life. Try to invest in it, to use it to grow, to reach a high level, to achieve your goals, make a huge leap because of it in your life. It's very important to control your mind while you are facing the trauma, to make it as opportunity and to invest in it to grow. Yeah.
So basically we're talking about don't let the mind control you, you control the mind.
Yeah, correct. So that's why I want to tell the audiences to know more about V.M.G. It's a technique that give you the support, to give you the balance, give you the real growth, to give you the real treatment to deal with any sort of challenge that you are facing, or you faced before, or maybe you will face in the future.
Thank you very much, Doctor. And it was, as usual, it was a very enlightening conversation that we've had today. And I'm sure we'll pick up more subjects and we'll go a little bit more deeper, because this is something that I wanted to go more into a PTSD, but due to time constraints, I think we'll have another conversation directly or about PTSD and PTG. So let's look into another conversation where we will talk about post-traumatic stress disorder and post-traumatic growth. Thank you again very, very much for accepting this conversation request and being here with us and joining us with this amazing conversation.